What happens when the FBI finally confirms they've busted a suspect in the shocking Charlie Kirk case, only for the details to line up almost exactly with the assassination attempt on President Trump? You're about to find out, and the truth will shake you. This isn't a random act of violence, and it isn't just another headline that disappears tomorrow. What we're seeing looks like a chilling pattern of precision, negligence, and cultural hostility that has been brewing for years, and it just cost one of America's most influential conservative leaders his life. If you care about truth that cuts through spin, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because this story only gets more disturbing the deeper it goes, and you don't want to miss what comes next. The arrest that shook Utah. The FBI announced the arrest of a suspect in connection with Charlie Kirk's murder at Utah State, and at first glance, it felt like the case was moving toward justice. But beneath the headline, something far more sinister was revealed. Kirk was struck with a single throat shot, instantly fatal, delivered with a level of accuracy that professional snipers describe as surgical. In gun homicide statistics across the United States, fewer than 1% involve this type of direct hit, making this attack a statistical anomaly, the kind of precision almost never seen outside of trained shooters. The announcement that a suspect was in custody may have reassured the public for a moment, but forensic details raised serious doubts. Was this individual really the shooter, or just a placeholder while authorities scrambled? Early chatter suggested multiple names, conflicting reports, and a fog of misinformation that made it impossible to separate fact from fiction. What looked like swift law enforcement success quickly started to feel like a staged curtain over something far more complex. And this is where the comparisons with Trump's shooting become impossible to ignore. The parallels with Trump's shooting. For anyone paying attention, the setup was disturbingly familiar. Charlie Kirk was shot from an unsecured rooftop, the same tactic used at Donald Trump's Butler rally the year before. In both cases, there were reports of individuals spotted on rooftops before shots rang out. In both cases, law enforcement failed to secure elevated positions, even though these are widely recognized as high-risk zones in event security. Secret Service data reveals that nearly 40% of modern assassination attempts involve shooters using higher ground, making this one of the most predictable and preventable risks. Yet in Utah, as in Butler, those warnings went unheeded. It's not just a tragic coincidence, it's the recycling of the exact same failure. When security blind spots repeat, patterns emerge, and those patterns reveal negligence at best, or complicity at worst. The FBI and local police now face serious questions. Why was the same weakness exploited twice, in events tied to high-profile conservatives, with devastating results both times? But before even tackling those failures, we need to confront something even more shocking: how long the suspect was allowed to remain free. Yet it's the hour that changed everything. In the chaotic aftermath of the shooting, the suspect wasn't immediately caught. Despite a massive law enforcement presence and a lockdown, credible reports confirm that more than 1 hour passed before authorities had anyone in custody. That gap wasn't just a logistical mistake, it was a dangerous void. A Department of Justice audit in 2023 concluded that even a 15-minute delay in suspect containment during mass violence can triple the risk of additional casualties. In Utah, we're not talking about 15 minutes. We're talking about more than 60 minutes, in which thousands of attendees were left exposed to potential follow-up shots or secondary attackers. Eyewitness accounts described panic, confusion, and the eerie sense that nobody in charge knew where the shooter actually was. This wasn't an isolated gap. It was a collapse in the very chain of protection meant to prevent further bloodshed. 1 hour may not sound like much, but in a crisis, it's an eternity. And it raises the uncomfortable reality that if a trained assassin had help, that hour would have been more than enough time to orchestrate an even bigger massacre. That kind of delay is not just failure, it's negligence that demands accountability. And when we look closer, we see it isn't the first time conservatives have been targeted. the pattern of targeting conservatives. Charlie Kirk's killing falls into a disturbing pattern of escalating violence against conservative voices. This isn't speculation, it's backed by data. The Anti-Defamation League documented a 67% rise in politically motivated attacks in 2023, and the majority targeted right-leaning organizations, rallies, and public figures. Kirk wasn't just another pundit. He was the founder of Turning Point USA, a figure who built influence among America's youth and represented a direct challenge to progressive dominance on campuses nationwide. That influence made him a symbol, and symbols become targets. Over the past decade, we've seen an undeniable rise in confrontations, from heckling and threats to physical assaults, and now assassinations. For many on the radical left, silencing opposition has moved from debate halls into deadly arenas. This wasn't an isolated shooting. It was another chapter in a broader campaign to strike at figures who disrupt the status quo. And when the strike itself is executed with near-perfect accuracy, coincidence is no longer a satisfying explanation. The radicalization factor. Even before we know every detail about the suspect's background, the cultural conditions that allow attacks like this to happen are staring us in the face. A survey from the University of Chicago's NORC Center in 2023 revealed that 1 in 4 Americans now believe political violence can be justified under certain circumstances, the highest level ever recorded in modern polling. That means millions of people view violence not as a tragedy, but as a legitimate political tool. And platforms like Twitter and TikTok have become accelerators, amplifying outrage into trending hashtags and turning extremists into digital celebrities. Within hours of Kirk's death, posts celebrating the attack spread across social feeds, with some accounts boasting tens of thousands of likes. Words aren't just words anymore. They are the fuel that primes bullets. What once would have been fringe lunacy now enters mainstream feeds, normalizing the idea that violence has political legitimacy. Radicalization doesn't happen in the shadows. It's happening in plain sight, and the results are deadly. And when institutions designed to prevent violence fail repeatedly, radicalization turns into opportunity. Institutional failures on repeat. The saddest part of the Charlie Kirk case is how predictable it was. From Columbine to January 6th to Trump's Butler rally, America's institutions have consistently missed the warning signs that precede violence. A Government Accountability Office review of mass attacks showed that in 70% of cases, red flags were present but ignored. Kirk's event was no exception. Eyewitnesses described seeing figures on rooftops well before shots were fired. Yet, there was no intervention until after it was too late. That isn't random oversight, it's systematic failure. Time and again, reports are logged, alerts are raised, but bureaucratic inertia or lack of coordination paralyzes response. When the cost is measured in lives, these aren't small errors. They're catastrophic betrayals of duty. What makes it worse is how these repeated failures chip away at public trust, creating the sense that even our leaders aren't safe, and by extension, neither are we. And when protection breaks down, culture and politics rush in to fill the void with violence. The cultural war. Beneath the violence. Charlie Kirk's assassination was more than a single act of political violence. It was a flashpoint in America's ongoing cultural war. Since 2016, conservatives have built alternative media ecosystems, education platforms, and political movements that bypass traditional institutions long dominated by progressives. This shift represents not just political opposition, but cultural disruption. And that disruption has provoked desperation from those unwilling to lose control. Pew Research surveys show that political polarization in the United States has reached its sharpest point in decades, with majorities on both sides saying they view their opponents not just as rivals, but as threats. In that climate, violence becomes an extension of politics, the final weapon when arguments no longer suffice. Kirk's death must be understood not just as an individual tragedy, but as part of a larger battle over cultural dominance. His assassination signals that the fight has entered a deadly phase, one where blood is spilled to preserve influence. Charlie Kirk's voice was silenced, but his legacy will not fade. His death is a brutal reminder that freedom and truth come at a cost, and that cost cannot be ignored. Every detail of this case proves how fragile safety is when institutions collapse, and how vital it is for ordinary people to stay vigilant. If you believe legacies like his must continue and the truth must not be buried, subscribe right now and share this video everywhere. Together, we honor his memory, we strengthen the fight, and we make sure that freedom cannot be silenced. Not today, not ever.